back to the B2B Uncut podcast hosted by Oro Commerce. I am your usual host, Aaron Sheehan. With me today is someone who makes me happy and proud to be part of a bold brotherhood, Jason Hein. Jason, we've seen each other so many times in the last year, reflecting glare into the audience from the stage. So I know who you are and I know what you do, but our audience might not. So why don't you tell everybody listening, who is Jason Hein and what does he do? What has he done?
Where is he and why is he here? Exactly. Why have you let me into your virtual home to sit across from each other with our coffee mugs in hand, talking about the joy that is B2B e-commerce? Cheers, my friend.
Cheers. You got bourbon in yours, I guess, too, huh?
Coffee. No, it's just straight Kentucky bourbon.
Just coffee. Start the morning right.
Exactly. The best to you each morning. So Jason Hein, I have sort of been running around loose in the world of B2B e-commerce in one way, shape, or form for coming up on 23 years. Wait, no. 23, 24 years. Whatever. A long time. I got my start working for an industrial distributor as a practitioner out of the gate. I was working for McMaster-Carr, and that's where I learned about merchandising. Like, how do you describe a product in a way that is compelling to your customer? And McMaster does it in a very strange way. They do it in a way where they're not leaning on things like brand or photographic quality images. Like they really crystallize the way they talk about every product that they sell in a very, very specific way to kind of strip out all of like the marketing fluff and really focus it on what is it that this thing does for you. And I always, it was funny to grow up in that environment. And then, I left there after about 12 years, went to work for Amazon. I was on the team that helped build Amazon Business, did a lot of work, loading vendors, managing vendors, but then also just loading all the data. Like Amazon systems weren't built to sell pumps, and they weren't built to sell carbide end mills, and they weren't built to sell these very technical products that had all these different attributes that you needed to differentiate products. So we had to build a lot of ourselves. I had to work with a catalog team. We had to add a bunch of attributes, to make a bunch of changes to the taxonomy and to the data model. And I found that work so interesting that when I left Amazon, I basically did that. I got into consulting, and that's how I got into the world of product data and product content. I hooked up with a couple of friends of mine, ex-McMaster people. I worked for a couple different boutique consulting firm. This was before B2B e-commerce was really a thing. Back in like 2014, it was just getting started. Helped a lot of companies who were basically just building their digital foundation. Like, hey, how do we get started? Amazon's off and running. We need to make sure we don't get far behind. What do we need to do that? How do we need to think? What do we need to invest in? What kind of technologies do we need to choose? So I did that for about 6 years. And then I went and joined a search and merchandising company called Bloomreach. SaaS company.
Oh, yes. And very familiar.
I kind of did a lot of work around their kind of go to market. Obviously, they got a huge customer base in the consumer space, but they wanted to get into B2B, expand their markets a little bit. So I helped them with that for a few years. And since leaving them, I've been working on this kind of solo project, helping companies figure out like, how can we actually start to solve the product data problem? Because after 23 years, there are still so many companies in the distribution space or in the manufacturing space who keep waiting for a miracle to happen. They keep waiting for a miracle piece of software, a miracle platform. AI, generative AI is going to be the new miracle, but it's not. And I'm sure we'll talk about it. But that's what I do.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's good. It's a valuable thing. I talked to I had Jay Schneider also of the B2B eCommerce Association because you're working with him now as well.
Yes, I am.
On a couple of podcast episodes ago. So I don't want to cover all the same ground that we did there. We could talk a little bit about like, what is merchandising in a B2B context? Why do so many people's eyes glaze over in the B2B? And you talk to a distributor and they're just like, sort of panic, not really sure that it's relevant to them. You mentioned McMaster-Carr. I know people who are, you're watching the video feed of this podcast. I can see, of course, a couple of McMaster catalogs actually on your shelf behind you. If you're listening to this, you'll have to close your eyes, use your imagination. They are very large and yellow, but not having physical access to your catalog, I looked just as you were speaking at McMaster-Carr's catalog, which I go back and I look at that usually every couple of years just to see it. It's always fun because reading the descriptions here. This is just such a masterclass in how to describe products in a way that's useful to the person who's buying them. And there's so much context about how to use what because they're selling screws and fasteners and things like that. There is so much context in here that I know McMaster-Carr did not get from their suppliers. The supplier data feed did not pop out of an SFTP folder with all of this, these sentences like, with a tensile strength of 170,000 PSI, these alloy steel screws are stronger than grade 8 steel screws. Length is measured from under the head. And there's a bunch, there's like, just like which coating do you want for corrosion? And it's all narrative. And there's comparisons to other products sort of nestled in the product description. So when you're getting it like, okay, this is what it does. This is what it doesn't do. If I have a need that's not met here, I should click here and go to get this other product that actually does do the thing. Right, the use case is baked in the description. It's so good, good. I love to see more of that. We last ran into each other in Germany. It's crazy to say that was last month because it feels so much longer ago.
It does.
Because it was early December.
It was.
Yes, before Christmas. You were leading a breakout exec session in a room. I had the privilege to sort of join that and be in there. So. In that session, for everybody listening, talk about what was your topic of discussion? What were you leading? Did you learn anything from the attendees there? And what are you hoping that they took away from it? If you had to condense that sort of like hour-long breakout that we did into just a few minutes of narrative description, how would you describe it?
It was a discussion on accelerators for B2B distribution. Because I think that there's still a lot of, certainly in the kind of mid-size and smaller space, there's still a lot of distributors out there who have not even begun their journey into digital yet. And it's kind of scary because, they look at the companies that are there and they seem so far ahead, right? Like, how can we, first of all, we don't want to make any mistakes because if we make a mistake, then, we're going to fall even farther behind. But, it's not that we have to start running. We have to run faster than everybody else so that we can catch up. So I was talking through a couple different things that companies can do to speed that process, and the biggest one is to just actually address the product data problem in the room. There's everybody tries to sidestep product content, and because it feels overwhelming. Right. It feels like this big, giant problem. And the only way to solve it is to fix all of our product data. And I think that used to be the philosophy back when, kind of like the consulting firms and the advisory houses would just be like looking for the biggest possible SOW amount. Yes. Oh, yes. You have 1 million SKUs. Yes. Guess what? It will cost $8 a SKU to fix all of your SKUs. That will be $8 million, please.
It's a lot of money.
It was, and there were companies who paid it, believe me. But like, I think one of the things that has become clear to me is that just because you have your products up on a website does not mean that they are all equally important to your customers. And with the abilities of analytics now, it's actually possible to really focus your resources on the products and on the categories that your customers are actually looking at.
Oh, I like this. I like this. Let's get specific here.
Mhm.
Because I get asked this question from time to time here at Oro and honestly many times over the years as a practitioner. Um, and I think it's the sort of like the where to start question that gets people a lot because it seems so when you have a giant catalog, it seems very daunting. So if I'm a industrial parts distributor, right? I'm selling to individual contractors. I'm selling to maybe retail stores like Ace Hardware or things like that, or maybe
Yeah.
like Napa Auto. I'm just going to parts stores. It doesn't really matter what kind of parts because parts. I'm not saying that parts are parts and they're interchangeable, but like the challenges, I think from a product data standpoint are relatively the same, whether it's forklift parts or automotive parts or HVAC or whatever.
Goods.
If
Yeah.
let's say I have an e-store, and I'm gonna call it an e-store because people still call it an e-store, and I want to put my little AOL CD into the disk drive and spin it in my e-store. I have an
You've got
e-store. I have
orders.
a Yeah, I know. I have a print catalog where the categories are color coded because I'm very sophisticated. And I say there's a banner on the front of my paper catalog and it says over 600,000 parts in stock. And then it's somewhere there's an order form where it says, we can get a million more, right? We can drop ship a million more basically from our suppliers. We're only showing you part of the catalog. So that's 1.6 million parts that I would like to sell, could sell. Um, where do I start? Like, what's the most impactful way to look at it or thing I can do to improve it? And because they aren't my products, right? I'm a distributor usually. And so like I might have some stuff that I am white labeling maybe, but like for the most part, it's other people's stuff. So, Jason,
Yeah.
where do I start?
So, I have a daughter, right? She's 10 now, so it's going to be a while before I have this conversation with her in real life.
Oh boy, where is this going?
But, one of the things that I will have a conversation with her someday is like she's going to go out and she's going to like all of us do, start to go out and experience the dating scene. Like, what is it like to go out with this person or that person? And you're going to figure out what you like and what you don't like. And when you think about what are the signs of somebody who is in a healthy relationship with a partner, the thing that they have is they have boundaries and they have expectations. The same rule applies to a relationship between a distributor and their suppliers, right? Like, if I go out into the dating world and I just accept whoever says yes, right? Like, what kind of relationships am I likely to find myself in? Are those likely to be healthy relationships, productive relationships, mutually satisfying relationships? Or
Probably not. I think
not,
very transactional relationships, maybe.
right?
I
Like,
do partner management for Oro. I mean, this is a constant. This is not dissimilar to what you were describing.
there you go. Yeah, there's a lot of dating in the partner world. I know. And
Well, I wasn't going to go, not literally necessarily. I want to make it really clear for all the listeners
but
and the HR
true.
department.
That is not
Like,
required
yeah,
to be a partner of the
not,
Oro
yeah.
ecosystem. But so one of the things that you as a distributor can do is you can set a standard for when I am talking about that socket and cap screw you were referring to. Like, what are the attributes that my customers need to differentiate and discover the products that they're looking for? And if I am able to just set that standard and hold all of my suppliers to that standard, at least ask them for it, the odds that I'm going to be able to build a better experience because the content I'm able to get from my suppliers meets the what was the 4 C's of content. You were asking me earlier, what's the thing I took away from that session? I had a conversation with somebody who attended that session afterwards because I talked about the 4 C's of content. If you want content to build an excellent customer experience for your customers, the content you get has to meet these 4 standards. It has to be correct, obviously. If it's not correct, people are going to get hurt. It has to be complete. If you have an attribute that you're using to let your customers filter selection, then every SKU where that attribute is applicable has to be populated. Otherwise, when you filter by it, you lose that selection. It has to be consistent. You want to use the same terminology, the same, it's always 1 inch, not 1.0 inch, not 1 inches, not 1 quotation mark, right? That super annoying feeling that we all have when we're looking at a filter in the left nav and we see like 3 different values doing the same thing. You're like, oh crap, now do I got to select all of them or any of them? And I got to roll it out myself. It's a huge pain if it's inconsistent. And then it has to be clear, meaning I want the language that is being used in your content to be something that's approachable to me who may not be a product expert. So that was the 4 C's: correct, complete, consistent, and clear. But this gentleman came up to me afterwards and said, I have a 5th C. And I'm like,
a 5th C?
I was like, really? Okay. Well, lay it on me. And he said, it needs to be contextualized. And I thought, at first I was sort of like, well, no, but I honestly, like the whole flight back, I was coming back and I was thinking more and more about this. And I think that he's right. Because the thing about the 4 C's is that there is an order of operations here, right? The content that we work with has to be correct first and foremost. If it's wrong, that's really, really bad. Then work on making it complete. Fill the gaps. Get rid of the missing data. Once it's not missing, then work on normalizing it. And then work on making the language really clear and approachable. Like there's sort of like it's almost like, speaking of bourbon, it's like a distillation process, right? Like every time you run it through,
okay,
you're crystallizing it and clarifying it a little bit more. What contextualization is, it's about how do I choose which content I want to show to a particular customer, depending on the context that they're telling me about their need. Maybe it's they're in a particular industry. This customer is in a food production factory and they're looking for gloves versus this customer is in they're a welder on an oil derrick. They probably want a very different kind of glove than somebody who's a nurse. Or maybe it's the application, and the application that they're trying to solve is in the keywords that they're giving us.
Yep. The attributes they care about are going to be different from each person, maybe even expressed in different language, which is one of the value adds of a distributor, right? What is every distributor says? We know our customers. That's the value we add. That's why you don't buy direct from the manufacturer. You buy from us because we know what you need, because we know the industry. You have to, you can't just say that. That can't just be text on a landing page. You have to show that through the buyer journey and how you describe the products that you're selling. I want to roll that back a little bit, what you said. So I'm that parts distributor. Where do I get started? The very first thing you said, and I want to come back to this, is ask your suppliers for better data. But what was nested in your answer there was ask your supplier, because if you don't ask, you don't get, right? Like this also pertains to dating, by the way. You have to not only say, hey, give me better data. You actually need to have an opinion as to what better means, because your supplier doesn't know that. If they knew that, they would be distributing it themselves. They don't. So you need to tell them what data model, what fields, what values matter. And it's going to be different per category, I imagine, right?
Yeah, so yes, asking your suppliers for better data is always a good aspirational thing to get into. The reality is a lot of, especially the big suppliers, they're going to give you what they have. Like 3M is not going to give you a bespoke export of like exactly how you want your values to show up in your experience. But what you can do is you can establish that standard. You can say, we're going to call it this. And then when we start implementing either a governance functionality within a PIM, now just knowing what we want to call it means we can look at the values coming from 3M and create an algorithm or a script that automatically normalizes,
and
they're calling
it when it comes in. Yeah,
Exactly.
I think that's fair. I agree. A lot of the bigger suppliers are not necessarily going to respond to that. You might be surprised, and I have run into use cases where sometimes a supplier will have a separate file of extra information that they use, and they were never sending it to most people. They were just like keeping it for internal purposes. And every so often you can get like the extra stuff if you ask, because
Yeah.
you have to ask for it.
Yeah. Asking,
But
obviously you always want to ask if they have it. Like you
so
just
start
never
by
know.
asking
But
and create. Yep.
start by
Go ahead.
defining what is your rule book for your product data, because the rule book that you are going to set that defines whether or not the product data I have is good for a product in this category is going to be determined more by your customer needs than the supplier. So you have this additional information. I know how my customers talk about this product. I know how my customers use this product. And so I'm contextualizing the content that I am building my site around to account for that in a way that my suppliers just won't. They're not gonna do that.
Right. Right.
So my
But
just
if I'm
creating that
I'm that
model.
distributor with 1.6 million SKUs, I probably need to pick a place to. I can't do them all at once. So how do I decide which category or type of product that
Yep.
I focus with first? Because I can't boil the ocean.
Right. So this is where e-commerce actually becomes your gateway drug to be able to do this. Right.
Ooh, I like
So
that.
the wonderful thing about launching a website is that if you set up your analytics right, you can see what are your customers doing? What categories in my overall catalog is the traffic flowing to the most? Certainly anecdotally, you can go to your salespeople and say like, hey, what categories are the biggest for us? Oh yeah, adhesives and sealants or Jansan, or like, they'll anecdotally be able to tell you that. But when you have a digital website, you can drill in as specific or as broad as you want to and use that to determine. I generally say when you're building a data model or a rule book, there's sort of a baseline that you have to do for everything, right? You have to have like a title. You have to have, some degree of product and, attribution. You have to have the hierarchy of what your taxonomy actually looks like. But when it comes to things like where am I going to invest in, boosting my gap fill, like my second C, right? Completeness. If I've got two categories, both of which are missing, 80% of the data needed to drive a faceted search attribute, one of them is getting 10,000 hits a week. The other is getting like 10 hits a week. Where am I going to invest? I'm going to invest in the one that's getting traffic because one, I'm going to see results faster. When there's traffic going to it, I'll see the impact of that on my business. And I can then take that to my boss. Say, hey, we spent $25,000 improving our fill rates on attributes in this high traffic area. And look what happened. Like, 80, 90, 800% increase in the number of sessions where people were using that facet. And that resulted in ads upping the rate of add to cart, upping the rate of lines per order, upping the rate of average order value. You can create those connections much more quickly in digital.
Yeah, and it's all just straight math, and it's well known, I think, in B2C how you go out and you project revenue gains from site improvements. This has been a sort of an ongoing thing. I crank the AOV a little. If I can crank the AOV and conversion rate by, 0.5%, keep the traffic levels the same. This is the amount of revenue. It's all interconnected, and it's very interesting. If you raise let's say I raise traffic, but I keep conversion rate the same, there's more money. If I raise traffic and I increase the conversion rate, you make lots of money,
more money,
more
yeah.
zeros.
Yep.
And so it's something that anybody that's been in e-commerce for a while can help you walk through the math and how to make that case and prove out the ROI. It is interesting. You talked about we were talking sort of like before around sort of chicken and the egg problem a little bit of I want I'm a distributor, I'm a manufacturer, I want to do e-commerce, I need to get my product data fixed. But to get my product data fixed, I need my e-commerce to exist. Maybe I need a PIM. I buy a PIM. That's some sort of like gateway drug, to use your phrasing from earlier. what I guess what I'm getting from you is that there is no simple answer to this question because it's dependent on each business individually, how mature they are at any particular spot in their journey. Um, we were talking about sort of the large distributors. There's a topic that I wanted to talk to you about that I haven't talked to you about before, actually. So this will be new
What?
for us.
Okay.
I know, marketplaces, and I'm bringing it up
Gee.
because it used to come up all the time. I would say a few years ago, everybody and their brother wanted to start a marketplace. Everyone wanted to be Amazon. Um, you know, you have a lot of experience with Amazon, building on Amazon business, as you talked about, which I'm sure makes you a lot of friends at trade shows who are like,
You're welcome.
I hate you. I know you're
Mhm.
not. Welcome, guys. So I kind of want to talk about operating your own marketplace in the B2B world because at Oro Commerce, we are a marketplace operation application, which is what Gartner sort of identified. MOA is the acronym. And my parts distributor, let's say I'm that parts distributor, I'm drop shipping stuff. What's the line between I'm drop shipping from a lot of third parties to I'm operating a marketplace with third party sellers and my own stuff, let's say. Where does that line fall and how what's the decision making process in a business when they decide to go and marketplace? What's the difference in how you conceptualize the channel and the product data when you're like, I'm drop shipper versus I'm a marketplace? Is there anybody out there that's doing it right in your mind?
Marketplaces? Hmm. Well, so let's I'm going to step back and just kind of I want to talk about something that I think people don't really think about when they talk about marketplaces. So when I was at Amazon, we were Amazon Supply. So Amazon Supply was a separate website that we built to basically prototype a lot of these functionalities that are now part of Amazon Business. But the difference was that all of the SKUs that were available for sale on that site were only shipped from and sold by Amazon. There were
no 3P, huh?
There were people who would load ASINs into the category on Amazon, but in terms of what we were doing and the experience we were building, it was only retail on Amazon Supply. And part of that was because what the things that we were trying to do required a certain level of data quality. Like, that the SKUs had to be complete and they had to have they just had to be built well for it to work, at least, in those early phases. So we had much, much higher standards for product data because we were loading retail ASINs than most third-party sellers invest in their ASINs that they're loading into a pure marketplace.
Yeah.
Now, that let us do a lot of things around facilitating discovery and launching a lot of new faceted search and having really clean, highly normalized values for those facets. However, Amazon's business model is all dependent on that big flywheel, right? More selection equals more SKUs equals more customers equals more money equals more sellers equals more SKUs, and all of that optimizes.
Marketplaces are hard to build from the ground up because you need the traffic to attract the vendors, and you need the vendors to attract the traffic. And where do you start? And this is where we see it in B2B sometimes. Is usually the conversation that I have is, I'm a distributor, or I'm an industry insider, or I'm connected to the suppliers. I already have I have an audience, or I have the supplier relationships already. Nobody who, if you have neither of those things, don't do it. It would be my advice to you. But if you've got one of those things as an existing business, you might be able to solve that problem, that flywheel.
The big problem is for almost every marketplace I have ever encountered or worked with, including Amazon, the challenging part is the investments in product discovery and findability do not keep up with selection. In general, the companies that are running these marketplaces, they go full bore on more and more selection coming in, but they're not investing in the infrastructure or the technology or the capabilities to help customers get from a homepage to a SKU. And certainly we've seen that with Amazon, but now Amazon's problem is compounded because at this point, the only way to have any buyers find your product on Amazon is to spend a lot of money on Amazon marketing services, to spend money on sponsored ads, to spend money on, boosting your relevance within a certain keyword term, to, it is so hard now to launch in fact, I would hypothesize it's no longer possible to just launch a product on Amazon and organically, because it's so good or so much differentiated from everything else in the marketplace, have it naturally bubble up to the surface.
And this is why people are building their own marketplaces, right? They're trying to peel away from being dependent on Amazon. Do you ever run into or work with businesses who are trying to build their own Amazon in the B2B space?
Absolutely. I've worked with a couple. And the problem that they will have is, like, Amazon's problem is a little bit unique because their selection is so big, right? That, like, the thought of how do I arrange? I mean, it's one thing when I say, hey, I've got 100 products, lay them out on the shelf so that I can browse them. Okay, now it's, I have 100 billion products, lay them out on a shelf so that I can browse them. There's just a degree of scale that the old ways of trying to help navigate that experience. These new marketplaces that are launching now are going to have this same problem, which is why, if the VP that I used to work with at Amazon, he said he was Steve Frazier. He's one of the smartest people I ever worked with. And he said that, like, I remember once in a meeting sitting with him and he was talking about, like, hey, what are you doing to make sure that, the product data you're loading in is good quality? And I said, well, we're loading what we have now. We'll come back later and we'll fix it. And he's like, you're not going to come back later and fix it. You're just not. You're never going to have an opportunity to do that here. It's always going to be focused on your new selection. So, just keep that in mind when you're going for it. And you know what? Like, he was totally right. The tidal wave of selection, especially once the marketplace opened, it just makes it really, really hard to try to go back, set a standard for product data, and then retroactively go and fix all of the SKUs that you have. So it goes back to the very first thing you said, like, what are the things that anybody should do out of the gate? Set that baseline standard for what categories you have. What are you going to call them? How are they going to relate to each other in, big and broad to leaf node specific sort of thing? What attributes are relevant? Like, when you think about it collectively, product data and product content feels really overwhelming because you're thinking about it all at once. Like, it's like, think of everything in the mall, right? In every store. Like, you just can't. But if you go and you walk to, oh, here's the shoe store. Oh, here you go. This is the toy store. This is the bookstore. As you walk through those, you can, in your mind, think about, like, what are the categories of shoes? What are the categories of toys? What are the categories of books?
Right.
And use that to start to set some standards. It is possible if you do it sooner rather than later, and before, and then, like we were talking about earlier, let the direction of your business help you focus where the fire hose is pointed.
Yeah. And you do the analytics to do that. This is good. It's funny because this is the B2B Uncut podcast, right? Where we're really focused on, and I think, delivering the true the truth about the challenges that we all face in this industry. This isn't a promotional, buy this product and all your problems will be solved, or buy this service and all your problems will be solved. And so I appreciate that, you had a pretty detailed outline of the challenges of operating a marketplace, starting one up and operating one, and how they relate back to, honestly, the same challenges that anybody in a core business would have. I think that's solid advice. Obviously, there are plenty of companies who are doing it correctly and doing it well, and they're doing it largely because they've already solved the business problem, and they're simply opening another channel. There's a marketplace
Yeah.
becomes a channel for them, not like an entire way of doing business. I want to switch gears a little bit because we're short on time here. I want to talk about the B2B eCommerce Association. So
Yes.
we just had Jay Schneider on. I know he's a contributor. The B2B e-commerce association, of course, B2B, B2BEA dot, is it .org, .com?
.org. Yeah. .org.
.org,
Yep.
.org. Of course, I've been on webinars with Justin King, right? One of the co-founders. Of course, talked to Justin many times over the years. Chris in the UK, your CTO, I believe, is his official title.
Yeah.
So Oro has we're a founding member of the B2B e-commerce association. Love the sort of the remit and purpose of like evangelizing and educating the B2B community on the value of e-commerce, and then the practical, how do I do it, and how do I get results out of it? How does e-commerce become a core part of my operating model and not a weird digital branch that's sort of grafted onto my business and sort of like sits out there, the e-store I was talking about earlier. So big supporter, big fan, and super glad that you are part of it. It is quite a collection of thought leaders that and experts that are being assembled over there. In your words, what is your role? What do you see as sort of like the purpose of the B2B e-commerce association? And what should we expect out of you guys as a group in 2025?
Oh, so my role is I'm the global director, as much as titles are important, as much as they matter. I'm the global director for basically product content and search and discovery. So I'm really leveraging my experience and background with the product data side of the B2B business. And I'm doing a lot of work right now. Actually, right now I'm working on putting together kind of a training program specifically around product content for B2B e-commerce. Like Justin right now actually is running a live training over the next like 8 to 10 weeks on go-to-market messaging, specifically targeting vendors, technology companies
Like
who
us.
are like you guys, who are trying to figure out how to talk to distributors and manufacturers of these kinds of products. Because as somebody who has sat in on an awful lot of demos for that kind of industry, many of you guys are horrible at it in ways that are
I agree. I agree with that. Well, because
painful.
many vendors are not native to the space, right? They started somewhere serving a different market, and they're branching into it. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yep. And the other reality is when you're used to talking to B2C companies, like, that CIO will flip the switch. If I talk to them about shoes and he sells apparel, he's just going to be like, all right, shoes, apparel, same thing, potato. I'm going to focus on the technology and the solution and just ride along. But if I'm a manufacturer of industrial hardware, like highly specialized industrial, like drawer slides and actuators and hinges and like specialty hinges, and somebody comes in and is telling me about like the wonderful work they've done with a perfume company, like the first thing I know is you don't know my business. I can't believe a word you say, and then you lose them.
Or the channel,
Right.
right? How the buyers engage,
Or the product.
because
Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
right, because it's very different in B2B, especially if you're used to sort of a highly tailored sort of CPQ process for buying. And
Right.
when you come in and you start talking about what we were earlier, conversion rate, average order value, those aren't necessarily terms that mean anything to a $750 million German distributor of industrial parts. Like, that's not how they conceptualize their business. And so
Their business
totally
has
totally
been
fit.
their business has been entirely different. Like the metrics are just different. So like
Exactly.
that's part of the education. So I'm working on building out a live training on like, hey, kind of like what we were starting with. Where do you start? Like, how do you on day one sit down and say, all right, I'm going to actually solve my product data problems. We're going to walk through a methodology of actually doing that. So that's going to be coming later on this year.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah. We have a number of events coming up. So we've got the B2B EA is kind of teaming up with the it's IRX, which is an internet retail.
Yes.
So they've
Yep,
always
yep.
done this big conference in the UK every spring.
Birmingham, yes.
Yep, in Birmingham. Yep. So the B2B EA is going to be basically running a whole separate wing arm of this event, purely focused on B2B e-commerce with our own talk tracks and speakers. And, I'll be there, talking about product content and discovery and all kinds of fun stuff. Where I'll have another one then in Australia in August, which yes, that in August that's coming up, and that's in Melbourne. So that's the kind of legacy one there. And then in November, I believe, is when the US instance of this is all under the B2B e-commerce world banner of the first, opportunities to actually get people in a room, practitioners, vendors, consultants. We're also, one of the things that we're doing a little bit differently is we're building out kind of our coaching. There's a lot of people on the practitioner side who also see this opportunity in B2B e-commerce. There's never been a need for people to kind of help out other companies in the space trying to make this transition. I can't do everything myself. I've come to accept that about myself. So there's this whole group of folks who have, recently left practitioner roles, like top 5 distributors in their major verticals, who are going to be there and participating and there to have conversations. So I'm really excited for how we're going to be framing these events. We're trying to make them very, to try to find that balance between making sure that the people that are up on stage have the practical experience and are actually telling stories about problems that they're solving, but also, and also, no offense by this, but like trying to find a way for vendors to get up and tell stories without it just being a sales pitch. That is a
it's so
that is
we
a
can talk more
hard
offline about that. That's you're speaking my love language now. So it's good. One of the things I'm really enthusiastic about is the community building that is happening in the B2B EA and the amount of resources that are available for businesses to learn from. The quality of the subject matter expert has just skyrocketed, really in even the last 6 months. And so the breadth and depth of the experience is out there. I want to ask one last question. We're almost out of time, and this is the unscripted question that I ask everybody who comes on. So we've not talked about this, but I know you'll have an answer. What is one piece of media, a book, magazine, a TV show, a movie, a podcast, academic journal, even, that you've read or watched or listened to in the last few months that stood out to you that you would recommend to other people? And I will tell you that sometimes people try to be very much honor students, and they're like, "Well, I read in this NAW paper, and it was just amazing and changed my life." Some people are like, I watched this awesome sci-fi show, and it was pretty cool, and I liked it." And people are kind of like all across the field. So you can take this as an opportunity to either look really nerdy, Jason, or really approachable. So I'll let you answer that however you choose.
so I'm going to do both because it's what I do.
Uh-oh.
Because I've talked about this on my LinkedIn before. Like my wife and I wrote, we finished watching Ted Lasso. We watched it late, right? Like we only finished it like a few months ago, and it just struck me what a complete parallel it is to the journey of a B2B e-commerce leader. at most
Oh boy.
B2B companies.
Way to
Because
bring
like
it back.
his whole thing, right, is like he shows up at this soccer team and like literally everybody around him thinks you don't know anything about this game. You don't know anything about what you're doing. And his whole point of it is like, I'm just going to be here to be a good coach. It's literally a masterclass in change management. And there are lessons here for new leaders moving into an established traditional B2B business for how to kind of inculcate yourself in a culture, how to kind of win friends and influence people, how to create connection with people who, maybe aren't your friends on day one. A lot of your outside sales execs are not going to be your friends on day one. They're going to think you're there to threaten them. They're going to think you're there to take your job when that is absolutely the last thing that you want to do. And in the end, it goes in a nice way. So that's my.
But did you enjoy the show?
I
Was
loved
the show
the show.
entertaining?
I loved the show. Loved it.
As a piece of entertainment and media, you approve of it. And as
Yes.
a metaphor for your job and life, you also approve of it. Ted Lasso, really, is there anything it can't do? Good answer.
I love
Way to thread the needle of answering both things, as I knew that you would. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, Jason. Where can people find you if they need your services or advice about fixing their product data?
Yeah, I mean the easiest way to get a hold of me is just to send me an email at jason@b2bea.org.
We'll get a link in the show notes to that, as well as a link to the B2B eCommerce Association website, where there's a directory, and you'll also be able to find Jason through there.
Exactly. And if and obviously connecting to me on LinkedIn is usually the way to keep tabs with me. I'm generally pretty much on that every day. It's really the only social media that I'm on anymore.
It is the price we pay for the lifestyle that we have chosen. The thug life chooses you. Something I tell myself every day. It's actually tattooed on
thug
my
life.
arms.
Love it.
Gotta love it. Actually, it's not true. But it was fun to say. Jason, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. And I know that we will talk again in the future.
I hope so. I mean, I hope this isn't our breakup call, because if so, it's going to be one of my weirdest breakups ever.
That would be pretty weird. Thank you all for listening. Really appreciate it. Please give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever the podcast client of your choice is. 5 stars is best. 4 stars is good. Anything less than that, just keep your opinions to yourself, and have a wonderful rest of your day, whoever you are, wherever you are.